What an absolutely amazing story this feeding of the 5,000 is. It's amazing for a lot of reasons. First and foremost is Jesus was struck with grief. He had just heard about the slaying of John the Baptist. John the Baptist was his cousin, a close friend, probably about the same age. And certainly Jesus followed John the Baptist in his early ministry. John the Baptist meant a lot to him. And to lose a very close friend like that meant a lot in terms of grief and coming to grips with what does death mean for this John the Baptist. What does it mean in his life? What is the threat to Jesus in this context? Because certainly Jesus would have been identified with him as well as many other people. And why was John the Baptist beheaded? Well, he criticized the Roman emperor. He criticized Herod Antipas. Because Herod, you see, took and had an affair with his brother's wife, Philip. And he forced his wife to divorce him, and then he married his brother's wife. What he did was immoral, wrong. And John the Baptist didn't hesitate to say so. Because John believed in morality. He also believed in righteousness. He also believed in the covenant and sacredness of marriage. So you see, John was beheaded because he criticized the empire, criticized Herod Antipas. Great grief struck Jesus. And so he wants to go away by himself and think about this thing and meditate on it. What does it mean? And where he gets into a boat and he decides, well, he'll roll down the shore a ways and then get off on land again. But as he was going, the crowd followed him. And when he got to the landing where he was going to have some meditation, the crowd was there. And he saw them, and in deep grief, he still responded to them. He took pity on them because he had been teaching them. He'd been talking to them. He'd been healing them. And so he had compassion on the crowd. And he knelt down and he healed a lot of the sick people. And he talked to them again. And he gave them hope. He gave them a sense of community. Well, who were these crowds of people? These crowds that followed Jesus were dominantly the poor people in his society. They were the peasant class. They were the expendable class. They were the day laborers. They were those people that worked on the boats, on the nets. They worked in small villages as potters, as dye makers, as people that made shawls and clothing, people that did menial jobs. Many, many who were poor, sick, and expendable in his society. And he related to them. He had compassion for them. He cared for them. He gave them hope in a hopeless situation. There's a very interesting book that I read this past week. It's written by Sarah Miles. She's a journalist. Worked in Central America, South America, worked in a lot of the conflict areas and reported to many of the well-known news agencies in the United States and made a living doing that. One day, she was in San Francisco, and her story goes this way. She says, one early cloudy morning when I was 46, I walked into a church, ate a piece of bread, took a sip of wine, a routine Sunday activity for tens of millions of Americans, except that upon that very moment, I was led to something very different. Led to a religion that wasn't just something I talked about. This was my first communion. It changed everything for me. The mysterious sacrament turned out to be not a symbolic wafer at all, but actual food. Indeed, it was the bread of life. In that shocking moment of communion, filled with a deep desire to reach for and become part of a body, I realized that what I've been doing all my life and what I was meant to do was to feed people. And so I did. I took communion, I passed the bread to others, and then I kept going, compelled to find new ways to share what I had experienced. I started a food pantry and gave away literally tons of fruit and vegetables and cereal around the same altar where I took communion. The church she's talking about is St. Gregory Episcopal Church in San Francisco. And around that altar, she started this food pantry. On Fridays, she would gather as much food as she possibly could, and she would put it on the altar. And what didn't fit on the altar, she put on tables around the altar. And then she invited people to come and take what they wanted. She didn't ask for an ID. She didn't ask for food stamps. She didn't ask to have a form filled out for their names. If they were hungry, she would feed them. Her first week there were 30 or 40 people. The second week there were 70 or 80. The third week there was almost 150 people. It got up to about 250 people, and she didn't know where she was going to get more food. And the interesting thing is she met a lawyer that was working against companies like Monsanto and what they have done. And if you follow that story at all, you know. But companies that didn't have a real strong sense of ecology and the care of the earth. And they were sued. And when they were sued, they had to pay these big lump sums to charities. And this lawyer chose the charity that Sarah Miles had started. So she got significant dollars from that lawyer as he came to the same church and saw what she was doing. Over a period of 10 years, she created about 10 pantries and is literally and still is feeding thousands of people in San Francisco who are poor. And the people that come there, many of them are out of work, many of them are drug addicts, many are alcoholics, many are prostitutes, many are low-life, outcast people, the marginal people of society, and they come to the altar of the Lord and receive bread. And over the years, many of those people have become her friends, and they become servants to help gather the food and to distribute the food. It's become a ministry in itself. Now granted, that's not our ministry. It's not the same thing that we do. But we need to applaud that because she lives out her vision of feeding the people. She lives out what Jesus has taught his disciples to do, give them something to eat. It's amazing. It's amazing that there are 7 billion people in the world and 1 billion people have some form of starvation or malnutrition every day. It's not that we don't have enough food in the world. According to the United Nations and all other organizations that have researched this, there is enough food to feed 7 billion people. It is just not equally distributed. It's not distributed with a sense of distributed justice. It's distributed according to who can pay for it. We as Christians are called to feed the people. Another interesting thing that Sarah Miles discovered was, she had a sense of Christianity. She began to understand it more profoundly. She said, Christianity proclaims against reason that the hungry will be fed, that those cast down will be raised up, and that all things, including my own failures, are being made new. It offers food without exception to the worthy and the unworthy, the screwed up and the pious, and then commands everyone to do the same. It doesn't promise to solve or erase suffering, but it promises to transform it, pledging that by loving one another, even through pain, we will find more life. And it insists that by opening ourselves to strangers, the despised or frightening or unintelligible other, we will see more and more of the holy, since without exception, all people are one body, God's. What a profound insight. She understands it. She gets it. Jesus said, give them something to eat. Suppose that that just tomorrow morning, 150 children were dropped off into our parking lot, ages 5 to 13. And suppose they came from Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador. Suppose that happened, what would we do? How would we address that issue? Our natural inclination would be to call the authorities and say, these people have been delivered here. They obviously are illegal immigrants. They need to be shipped back. Would that be our response? Could we do that? We might want to. And we might think that's the appropriate thing to do ultimately. But in light of the story of Jesus, could we do that? Isn't that the same kind of excuse as saying, we don't have enough food to feed these people? Send them away to the villages? Let them buy their food for themselves? Isn't that the same response that the apostles or the disciples are saying to Jesus? And Jesus point blank says, feed the people. Don't ask them for an ID. Don't ask for food stamps. Don't ask for them to fill out a form. Feed my people. The insight is that these are God's people. You know, I don't think we do it that way. I think you as a congregation would do something entirely different, because you do it in all kinds of other areas. You know, you have a commitment of compassion to people that suffer, that people that don't have food, that need things. You give shoes and clothes and coats. You give to lacking. Every first Sunday of the month, we collect $1 We collect money here, and that money goes to buy food. We collect $300 to $500, money that you give every Sunday, every first Sunday of the month. And then we buy food from the government subsidy programs, and we distribute that food to lacking. And you go out and you give it to the people, and you talk with the people, and you relate to the people. You're doing what God asks you to do. Feed my people. You do it in other areas, like at Port, for example. You feed people there. You relate to people there. You talk with people there. That's what we do as Christians. So I think if there were 150 children that showed up in this parking lot, you would get together and you do the thing that you're most capable of doing. You form committees and you get at it. And you get it done. And this congregation is very good at that. You organize. You set up sign-up sheets. You get people to give clothing. You get people to give meals. You get people to set up places for medical care. You give to the wounded warriors. You give blankets. I mean, it's amazing. So if we saw 150 children arrive at our doorsteps, we would do what Jesus did. We would have compassion on them, and we would organize to take care of them. That doesn't mean that we wouldn't talk with the authorities and we wouldn't check out their status. In fact, we'd have somebody that's doing that. We'd find out the names of these children. We'd find out where they came from, what their stories were, what kind of environment they lived in before that. Could they go back to that environment? If there's violence, if there's gang wars there, can we send them back there? I think if 150 children showed up here, we would do what Jesus asked us to do. Have compassion, teach, care, build a community of hope. And we would rest with the assurance that God abundantly provides. God abundantly provides. What a marvelous message for us this day. The message is so clear. You know, it's interesting, not only would we take care of those children here, we would also look at the systemic factors from which they came. And we'd say, what can we as a community, and what can we as a government do to change those systemic systems? One of the things that we're doing through Lutheran World Federation, Lutheran World Disaster Relief Fund, we have projects right this moment in El Salvador where we are helping people raise crops more effectively and efficiently so that they have food to sustain themselves. We're helping them with medical clinics. We're helping them with education. We're helping them with cottage industry. We are doing those things that help that community and those communities change. It's not a great effort that we're doing. We only have limited resources. But the point is, that's where our commitment is. And we are doing those things in El Salvador. You see, it's not a hypothetical situation that 150 children arrive in our parking lot. As you all know the issue, 70,000 children across the border this year. Children. What do we do with them? I don't know the answers, and I'm not suggesting answers. I'm suggesting that we do what Jesus said. Feed the people. No excuses. Feed the people. Seems to me the message for today is really clear. The message from Jesus is have compassion on others. Heal the sick. Speak to the hopeless. Listen to them. Give them something to eat. You see, Jesus provides. Jesus multiplies. And God gives abundantly. And you and I, we are called to be those disciples to carry out that mission. Compassion, giving, affirming, and saying and trusting in God's abundance. Amen.